Okay, good morning. Today is July 12th, 2013. My name is Ubaldo Valdez, and today I'm interviewing Rich Lopez, an attorney in the city and county of Boulder. Our interview is being recorded for the Boulder County Latino History Project and the Maria Rogers Oral History Program. The videographer for today's program is Veronica Lamas. So with that, good morning, Rich.
Good morning.
Thank you for allowing us a few minutes of your time to interview you. I'm sure you have some very, very interesting stories, anecdotes to share with your public. Let me begin by asking you, when and where were you born?
I was born in Fresno, California in 1949.
Can you tell us about, first of all, your immediate family, and then extend that to your extended family, and talk about the dynamics of within the family, if you would, please?
Sure. I was born to a couple, Manuel Lopez and Lupe Ramos, who is now Lupe Marie Lopez, in 1949. I ended up being an only child because there was a threat of toxemia for my mother, and although she wanted to have many children, the doctor said no, just one. So that's why I ended up being an only child in a Hispanic community with typically larger families. I had aunts and uncles that lived in Boulder, California, where we eventually lived, and in Fresno, and quite a few cousins. So it was that was our extended family. We interacted quite a bit during my early years, either at meals. I had two cousins that were about my age, and we were in school together. So our paths crossed quite a bit.
Mm-hmm. And do you remain close to those cousins?
Oh yes, yes.
Tell us about that.
One of which is my older cousin, Alejandro Martinez, who is, he's about 7 years older than me. He's retired now, and we do maintain contact quite a bit. He's close to my mother. My mother's just about 92 years old and recently moved to Longmont. So I feel really blessed that she's still here. My father died when I was 15, so he's been gone for quite a portion of my life. But the family remains quite close. A couple of my uncles, or one of my uncles and one of my aunts, are still alive, and we see them occasionally too.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Moving along with a description of your early childhood, can you describe your early childhood and adolescent years and the community dynamics in which you grew up?
Sure. Fowler, California was a small farming community of about 2,500 people. Today it's maybe 4,000, I believe. The school that I went to was the one elementary school, and then the one middle school and one high school, just given the size of the community. It was a very diverse community. It wasn't predominantly Mexican American, Anglo, or any other ethnicity. There was Japanese, Armenians, African Americans, Mexicans. It was diverse, and at that time it was really quite inclusive, a term that I learned years later. So growing up, I was part of a dynamic and diverse community without really knowing that there was anything else but that. It was years later where I came to understand that not all communities are diverse, and some are very segregated. So during school, it was a very enriching experience for me. I didn't feel as though I was discriminated against in any way, because I was just like all the other kids I grew up with. It really wasn't until high school, when I was deciding that I really wanted to go to college and wanted to take college preparatory courses, that I had my first experience with discrimination. My high school advisor said that, Rich, you know, I know you want to go to college, but you're a Mexican, and Mexicans don't go to college. You should take wood shop and metal shop courses, and that'll serve you well in the future. That was kind of upsetting at first because I really did want to go to college, and I thought I could go to college. So to be discouraged at that point was a real challenge. I persisted and pushed back and said, no, I really do want to go to college. And he ultimately relented, and I went on to college and graduate school. And the sweet irony is that when I was in graduate school at Cornell, our paths crossed again when he was traveling back east. And we had a chance to go out to lunch together. And nothing was needed to be said about that past experience because he understood that that was wrong. And I think that it's helped shape me all my life.
Very good. As you think about it now as an adult, what was the source of your beginning to think about a post-high school education, of going on to college and creating or moving towards a professional career?
Well, it's really clear for me. I think I was probably about 12 years old, and I was picking grapes every summer in the fields of California, which I did, my cousins did, we all did, to, you know, buy clothes for the upcoming school year. And at the end of the season, my dad told me that I didn't have to go back to school if I didn't want to. I could just continue working with the crews there, picking grapes and moving on to other fields and picking peaches and doing that instead of going to school. Well, it's really, really hard work, and there was no way I wanted to continue doing that more than a few months a year. So I knew at, you know, probably age 12 that I was going to go to college, because I knew what the alternative was. And that sort of shaped and kind of set me off in a direction of education that I still think continues today.
Having made that decision as a young man, do you feel that you made all the right decisions in terms of preparing yourself to go on to college, or did other people have to step in and guide you in the process? And in fact, did they do that?
I think I made the right decision. I did the work to get to that position. Along the way during my education, during various decisions, other people did step in and I think provide a guiding hand. And the circumstances of life in the 60s also had a major role. When I was graduating from high school, Vietnam was really hot, and they were taking kids out of college if they weren't carrying a full load of classes. So rather than put myself at a risk of getting pulled out, I decided to enlist in the Air National Guard. There was a unit there in Fresno, California nearby. I had friends that had joined the Guard, and I knew roughly what the commitment was and the time frame. It's a longer commitment, 6 years, but it's part-time. So I made the decision then to join the Air National Guard and then continue on with school. So upon graduation, I spent a semester at a junior college, knowing I was going to be going into the service. And then I spent about a year on active duty, going through basic training and then technical training, which brought me out to Lowry Air Force Base here in Colorado. After that, I returned back to college and continued on with my education. But the education at college at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo was enjoyable, but when I realized that I needed a post-bachelor's degree, that's when people kind of stepped in and helped. I had applied to a number of graduate schools throughout California, and on a whim, sent an application to Cornell University in New York. There was a lady there that was on the faculty, a visiting faculty member, that looked at my application and recognized that the grades weren't that great, but I had the experience of being a graduate of a planning school, and I'd actually worked in an office during one summer. So she just kind of plucked me out of the pile and said, I think this student, could succeed here. And that was a great moment for me. So I ended up getting an offer in terms of being accepted at Cornell, which was pretty eye-opening and kind of traumatic because I really didn't even know where Ithaca, New York was, having never traveled back east. I was determined to find a way to pay for it, and was looking at loans and trying to find the money for it. And then I got another letter saying that I had a fellowship along with a stipend, so I could afford to go to school. So I did. I went back for 2 years and completed my coursework, and then applied for a job back here in Colorado that brought me to Boulder.
Mm-hmm. You alluded to some of the work that you did during the summers as a teenager. I don't want to miss what I consider to be a very important part of the formative years.
Right.
Tell us about what you did. What were the crops that you were involved in harvesting? What did that require of you? How much did you get paid? Those kinds of things.
Oh, it's still quite fresh. I picked grapes, or as we used to like to call it, we would cut grapes. Because we weren't really picking anything. You were reaching underneath the vines with a sharp knife and cutting the stems to put it in a nice big basin. And when you had a full basin, you would lay out a brown piece of paper on the ground that had been smoothed out by a tractor, and you'd put the grapes on there to dry in the sunshine. That's the primary job I had every summer, working in the fields, picking grapes, and then the next step would be to turn the trays, where you flip the tray of grapes over so it would dry on the other side.
And what was the product?
Raisins. We would make raisins. Not wine at that time. Wine came many, many years later. So we were making, we were growing and processing raisins. My grandfather had about a 40-acre ranch that had grapes and peaches and nectarines. So I also picked peaches there, and I picked nectarines. And the price for trays, whenever you'd pick a basket full of grapes and spread it on a tray, ranged from 5 cents to 7 cents.
So it was piecework.
Piecework, yeah. So people would go down and count how many trays are in a row, and the row could be a quarter mile long.
And that was your row?
That was my row. And you had to pick fast. It was very dirty work because you're on your hands and knees, reaching underneath these very dusty vines that had snakes maybe in the row, or black widows, or mice, or whatever. So it was not very clean work, and the temperatures in the San Joaquin Valley at that time of the year would be 114 degrees, just like it was a few days ago. So you'd get up early and work a very long day and be covered from head to toe with grape juice and dust and dirt. So that's what left an indelible mark on my mind. So I did that. We picked peaches, which involved climbing tall ladders to reach up into the trees to cut those and bring those down in baskets and put them in boxes. And then during the processing, I was involved in boxing these fruits up, driving tractors through the vineyards and through the rows of trees, and lifting boxes onto a trailer, and then taking that by truck to a packing house or a processing plant. So in the year my dad died, I took over running a small 20-acre ranch that my family owned, and realized how hard it was to make a living, because I was in charge of, for the next year, the entire cycle of growing the grapes and raisins, turning them into raisins, boxing them, and taking them to market, basically. And realizing that if there happened to be some mold in the sample that the inspector would take, that would have an impact on the price of your whole year's effort. Or if there was a rodent that they found, you could lose, a significant percentage of your income for the entire year.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and at the end of it, I realized, I really don't want to be a farmer either, because that was equally hard and really at the mercy of the weather.
Good incentive for the decisions that you would ultimately make.
Absolutely. School is not dependent on the weather.
That's right. Very good. Let's go back now to your days at your first college experience at Cornell University. Can you describe for us the social and political activity of your high school and your college peer group, within your peer groups?
Sure. In high school, it was a small high school. My graduating class was 99 students. I'd grown up with all these kids, since kindergarten. There were a few new ones that moved in, so it was a very close-knit group of people. We were involved in all the typical high school activities and clubs, and I played football and basketball, and with kids that were my friends from childhood. Upon graduation, we basically went in different directions, and some of us went into the military, others went to college. So that part of my life, was in a sense over. People were off on towards their careers. I had the interruption of about a year when I was in the military before I really went into college full time. And at college, I went to Cal Poly, which is in San Luis Obispo, California. It's on the coast. So I moved away from my hometown, was living on my own. Again, since the military, I continued living on my own, and pursued at that time a degree in electronic engineering. I'd been a missile guidance and control specialist in the Air Force, so it seemed like a logical career to pursue. It was after about a semester in college in electronic engineering courses that I realized it was incredibly boring for me. So I switched back to my original career goal, which was architecture, and continued on in architecture for a number of years. When I was about a junior in college, there was a new program called City and Regional Planning that was offered at our college. And for me, it was much more interesting than architecture. The focus of architecture is really on a site, a building, a design, whereas city planning was broader than that. You looked at the neighborhood, the community, you realized how all the pieces fit together. So I made the change to the City and Regional Planning program, and continued on with that until I graduated in 1972.
Those were the years that were pretty tumultuous on college campuses throughout the country. Did that affect you in any way? Was there any way that you decided to stay clear of that? Did you become a part of that? How did that affect your presence in a major college campus?
It did have quite an effect. Because I had entered the military in 1968, I was in the Air Force, and I had a continued obligation for the next 6 years. So every 1 week in a month, I was leaving college to come back to a base and participate in drills. So I couldn't actually be part of any demonstrations, even though I was not in favor of the war. In fact, I was asked to be part of a riot control unit from our Air Guard base. And it was only the fact that I lived 3 hours from the base in San Luis Obispo that really prevented me from being a full-time or part-time riot control person for the Air Force. So that was sort of an interesting position to be in. I was wearing a uniform 1 week in a month, but I was not in favor of the war. And I'd already was in fulfilling my military obligation, but in a manner that it was unlikely, unlike recently, that my unit would be called up and sent to Vietnam. And there were other types of units that were sent. People I knew went. So I was able to avoid that. In Cal Poly and San Luis Obispo, it's between San Francisco and Los Angeles on the coast. So it was away from the major metropolitan areas. So the type of political unrest that occurred in those larger cities and colleges really wasn't there in San Luis Obispo. We read about it, but we didn't participate in it.
Very good. Now, coming out of college, tell us about your first professional job that you held.
My first professional job out of college was actually I worked part-time as a consultant doing traffic studies. And this is right after college and right before graduate school, which was just a few months. But it was an interesting decision because the job was easy. It was in San Luis Obispo. It was a beautiful place to work. The money was good. And I had to decide to leave that to pursue a graduate education. But having the opportunity to go to Cornell was something you couldn't pass up. So I went. The job after that was actually here in Boulder. I was hired by a former Cornell graduate who was the head of the planning department here to come and be a planner doing what we called growth management planning for the development of Boulder, which was experiencing tremendous growth pressures, and to do some neighborhood planning. Interesting facets of city planning. So I took the offer here. I did have an offer in Colorado Springs, but this was the one I wanted.
Okay, that's a good transition to our next question about your arrival in Boulder County. Would you share with us your initial impressions of Boulder County, the area, even the state of Colorado?
Right.
And not necessarily as it pertains to your chosen profession, but in general, what was the overall atmosphere that you found in Colorado in general?
I had experienced Colorado in 1968 when I was stationed at Lowry Air Force Base. On the weekends, I'd bought a small car, and a buddy and I would travel around Colorado. So I had a chance to see Boulder on weekends. We traveled up to the mountains, actually skied a little bit. So I'd had a chance to see a lot of Colorado. And again, it was 1968, and the population wasn't that great. It was still pretty small, just probably a couple million at best. Boulder was still a relatively small college town. It was very radical at the time. There was, a lot of demonstrations. There were a lot of people with long hair, and it was difficult for me to come in and try to mingle with people my age because I had short hair because I was in the military. So it was always a lot of fun to come up and have a taste of Boulder. And it was, progressive, pretty laid back at the time. It had changed very little, I think, a few years later in 1974 when I came here to work. In 1974, it was still progressive. I thought it was a fabulous place to work. It was a lot of fun. I was making, I thought, was great money, which was $12,000 a year as a planner. The mayor at the time was Penfield Tate, and our first meeting was really quite hilarious.
Let me stop you there for a second. Why don't you tell us who Penfield Tate was?
Penfield Tate was an African-American attorney who was the mayor of Boulder. Penn was the most colorful person and soulful person I'd ever met. I can remember our first encounter, and I was in the planning office, and he comes walking in to say hello to people. And I looked at him, and I kind of was in shock. Here was this African-American man with hair that was kind of processed back. He had a handlebar mustache. He was wearing love beads. And I'm thinking, oh wow, this is so cool. This is the mayor of Boulder. Look at the way this guy is dressed. Well, then I realized how I was dressed. I was wearing platform shoes, a yellow paisley suit with a velour blue butterfly bow tie, and my hair was down to my shoulders at that time.
You didn't own a white belt and white shoes, did you?
Nope, nope. So it was a, you know, I was looking at him saying, he's pretty amazing looking, and he was probably looking at me saying, this guy is kind of amazing looking too. But we were just, you know, creatures of that period of time.
That's an interesting aside. I knew Penn, and I think it's important for this interview that
Oh yeah.
that be part of it. Continue, please, if you would, with the position that you first talked about.
Sure. It was a very good position, a lot of exposure. I was involved in some very timely issues in Boulder, first of which was growth management planning. Boulder had just lost a lawsuit that had been filed by a developer challenging the city's growth management system. The system had been developed under Bill Lamont, and he was a very charismatic planning director, and his techniques were sound from a planning point of view, but they weren't necessarily legal. And he used his personality and his presence to really tell developers that you can't develop this piece of land because we're not ready for you to develop it, when in fact the utilities were in the road already as a result of a really probably a progressive utility development scheme that had been in place for years. So the city had lost this lawsuit, and so now they had to come up with another system to manage growth. And I had the opportunity to work on developing that system along with an attorney named Kirk Wickersham, who was a city attorney at the time. And we spent months and months kind of squirreled away up at Harbeck House, frankly, developing the system. And I had a lot of resources, but I was the only person that was really working on it full time. So we came up with a system that really, I think, made sense from planning and legal point of view. And it was about to be implemented, but it was very confusing for the average person. Developers thought it was anti-growth. Other people thought it was pro-growth. So it was confusing, and it sort of kind of died a quiet death. It was about that time that the Danish plan vote came in.
Tell us about the Danish plan, if you would.
Yeah, Paul Danish was a city councilman who came up with a simple solution, which was, well, let's just limit growth to 3% a year. And it was placed on the ballot, and it succeeded. Well, that was, you know, it's a great goal, but the problem was, how do you implement that? So lo and behold, they took the system that I had been working on that measured the impacts of development and used that as the criteria for implementing the Danish plan. But in addition to having these individual criteria on the traffic impact, the impact on parks, on fire protection, and all these other utilities and services, they capped it at 3%. But so because of the pressure, there was more than 3% potential out there. So it basically became a lottery system because everyone wanted to build in Boulder at that time. So it was a very interesting time to be involved in growth management. The subsequent techniques, the Danish plan that was implemented, went on for years, and then finally a downturn in the economy made it almost moot. But it was a very innovative way of dealing with growth management. at the city level.
That's very interesting, and we appreciate your commenting on that, because what you've just given us is a sequence of some very, very innovative kinds of growth management plans, and Boulder was the site for both of them, or even a series of them.
Right.
And I'm sure people will appreciate seeing that time sequence, you know, for those plans. So thank you for that. Let's move away from your professional work for just a minute, and let me, if you would please, in your career in Boulder, you have a very, very positive reputation for taking on some challenges that were both political and of real civic importance. What motivated you to enter the world of politics and the civic arena?
Well, I think I've always tended to drift into leadership roles. As I said, my dad died when I was 15. The saying we use around our family is that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And years later, my family and parents and acquaintances would say, well, your dad did something like that. You know, my dad was had been on a planning board in Fowler, California. He was about ready to run for city council when he became sick, so that ended that. But you know, when I decided to run for city council, it was really years after I'd actually gone back and gone to law school. So that came quite a bit later in my career. You know, I was really continuing on in the planning consulting world, you know, from Boulder. When I left the city of Boulder because of a discrimination suit that I filed against the city, I had been hired, I had applied for a position and wasn't selected, and someone that was selected didn't do the work. I ended up doing the work, and I could only attribute it to an act of discrimination. So I left the city of Boulder and filed a complaint. I later became a consultant. I opened my own consulting firm, and then I realized that most of my clients I'd be taking back through the city, and it may not be a good idea to have a discrimination suit hanging over my shoulder as I asked for permission to, on behalf of my clients, to develop projects, so I dismissed them. But it allowed me to do other things, such as get involved in community energy planning. We spoke earlier of some of the more innovative projects. In 1978, I prepared a community-wide energy plan for the city of Boulder as a consultant. It was part of a national competition. 24 cities were selected throughout the U.S. and received funding through the Department of Energy. We developed the very first community-wide energy management plan that was far in advance of the current efforts. And that was done here in Boulder with the assistance of the university, so the Solar Energy Research Institute, and that was a project I was able to lead for a couple of years. I subsequently did another one in Abilene, Texas. So Boulder has offered many opportunities to be on the cutting edge of some, I think, exciting projects.
Even beyond political projects like this, you have chosen to, and have been selected and been very effective in civic endeavors in the community. Sure. Describe some of those to you. In fact, tell us about some of the community service projects that you've been a part of in Boulder County.
I was asked by Superintendent George Garcia to be part of a task force that was doing a visioning project for what our graduates of the Boulder Valley School District should know in terms of their skills, their abilities, their qualities. It was called Visioning the New Century Graduate. So along with two other people as the co-chairs, we conducted a series of meetings, open houses throughout the school district with parents and business people, and soliciting their ideas and their beliefs on what our kids really need to know when they graduate. You know, what sort of language, if any languages, should they have? Some of the high points were that they thought second languages were really important, at least 2 languages. And one of them should be signing, which was kind of interesting. You know, Spanish, obviously, or maybe some other language would be really important. The ability to really do some good basic math, you know, check balancing, things like that. So it was a very interesting project. We presented the results to the school board, and they adopted it. And for the next few years, you'd always hear Dr. Garcia referring to how this plan or these efforts complied with the New Century graduate vision. A few years later, he asked me to co-chair a task force that was looking at the impacts of open enrollment. In Colorado, under state law, any child can go to any school as long as there's a seat and a position available. And in Boulder, there's been quite a bit of moving of students from their neighborhood school to other schools. And as a result, it was having a lot of impacts in terms of teacher load, clustering of native Spanish speakers in certain schools, and a perception about the performance of schools. The CSAP scores were often looked at as being an indicator of, you know, how well we're doing in our schools. So we conducted a number of interviews. We had experts on board that were actually doing some very good statistical analysis of what really happens when a student transfers out of their neighborhood school and goes to another school. And during the interviews, we found that many people that are making those decisions to take their kids out of the neighborhood school and take them to another school had never set foot in the neighborhood school. All the schools really, I think in Boulder County, are really top-notch schools. They may vary a little bit, and teachers may vary a little bit, but compared to your average school district in the nation, kids get a great education here. So the idea that they were taking kids from one school to another was curious. And we found out that people did it mainly from social pressure and really out of ignorance. They'd be at a cocktail party with friends, and there'd be a discussion about where are you going to send your kid. It was sort of like an act of love to send your kid to another school that has a reputation or a perceived reputation that is better than the neighborhood school, when in fact the neighborhood schools were more than adequate. And the tracking that was done by our experts followed up to see if in fact that student did perform better at the new school. And they didn't. Their grades didn't go up. Their performances on the scores didn't go up. So it was more perception than fact that, you know, this open enrollment was a good idea. So we presented a number of ideas to the school board on how they might be able to stem it, or at least require the parents to set foot into the neighborhood school. It's an unfortunate thing that the state law, in a sense, trumps our ability to regulate this, but we hope that educating the parents would help.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about what your present involvement in Civic Affairs.
Sure. A few years ago, I finished serving on the Denver Foundation. It's the largest community foundation in the state. It's about 85 years old now. I'd been asked to sit on an advisory committee after I left City Council for Human Services. I thought that would be great. The offer was to, you know, meet 3 times a year, review a bunch of proposals from nonprofits, and help make recommendations to award them money. And I didn't have to do any fundraising. So I said yes. After 2 years of involvement in that, I was really impressed with the programs, asked a lot of questions, and as a result, they asked me to join the board. It was a 6-year commitment.
That's the local community foundation?
This is the Denver Foundation. The Community Foundation is a more recent experience I've had. So I joined the board, and it's a 20-person board from the 7-county metro area, and I, in a sense, was representing Boulder County. After a few years, I started chairing some of the committees within that organization, and during the last 2 years of my term, I was actually the chair of the board of the Denver Foundation, which was just a tremendous experience. I learned about a lot of nonprofit programs throughout the metro area. I got to meet many of the people that are in charge of it, got to interact with a lot of really extraordinary people that were on the board. So that was quite a thrill. A few years after I started on with the Denver Foundation, I was asked to join the board of directors for Boulder Community Hospital. This was a different type of organization. It's a governing board, but it's healthcare. Until then, most of my experience in hospitals hadn't been favorable ones. I'd had injuries and knee surgeries, and I really didn't like being in a hospital. But my cousin, who I respect, used to be a medic in Vietnam, said, you should do this, Rich. It's important for you to understand how the average person suffers and deals with life. So I said, okay. So I joined that, I was asked to join that board, and found it also very interesting. It's a whole new field of healthcare, management of nearly 2,000 employees, budgets of in the hundreds of millions of dollars, investments in an equal size of hundreds of millions. Right. So I found it very interesting. I was asked to chair different committees. I chaired the credentialing committee, which determines who can practice at our hospital. I've chaired the planning committee, which does most of the long-range planning and help lead them into doing some real strategic long-term planning for the organization. Chaired that board for 2 years. And during my term, we made the $140 million decision to consolidate our 2 hospitals in Boulder and move it to Foothills. Very, very exciting subject matter, and it was something I've really enjoyed. I'm probably in my last 5 months of being on that board, so I've kind of looked around and was asked to join the Community Foundation of Boulder County. And I did a few months ago, and I think that's going to be equally enjoyable.
Very good. From your discussion with us, we're learning that you've acted as either legal counsel or project manager for several important environmental projects. As a minority professional, how has this either enhanced or hindered your effectiveness in these projects? If any?
I think it's enhanced. I was co-counsel on a lawsuit in Denver, in the Globeville area. And this was an example of what we call environmental racism. Typically, in planning in cities, you'll find minorities located in the areas of town where it's probably next to an industrial area, next to the railroad tracks, areas that really don't have the buffers that some of your wealthier neighborhoods would have. In Globeville, in Denver, it's really at the cross sections of a number of railroad lines in central Denver. The case involved a hydrochloric acid spill that was discovered one evening, and it was wafting up a huge hydrochloric cloud, and it was drifting over the Globeville neighborhood. When they finally called it in to the police and the fire department, they came to the neighborhood, and no one spoke Spanish. There was no way to relay to the citizens and the residents of Globeville the severity of what was going on. The best they could do, and imagine this, a hazmat person coming in a full helmet and breathing apparatus, knocking on the door, telling the people, "Vamos, get out, go away, go to the stockyards." Well, people were just terrified. And this was a violation of a federal law that triggered the lawsuit that we were involved in. But it was a very important lawsuit that, you know, brought the railroad company, the chemical company, and the neighbors into the case. And we eventually settled the case, and but it was really important. It kind of changed the thinking of a lot of people, recognizing that the law has to apply to all people, not just the English speakers. And we saw exactly how if the instructions and the emergency preparations aren't done to effectively help the people that you want to help, the residents nearby, because of this language, then you've got to change them. So in subsequent years, they've actually made changes to that, and I think things are a little safer now.
Very good. Over the years, as you've practiced in the professional realms that you've prepared yourself to practice, you obviously have developed a professional philosophy. Can you tell us what that philosophy is and how you incorporate that thinking into the manner in which you incorporate your leadership roles, both voluntary and or professional, if you would, please?
Okay. I think I mentioned that I grew up in a very inclusive elementary school environment, and I didn't know the term was inclusive at the time. It was just normal for me. But over time, I've seen situations and environments that are exclusive, where all people aren't brought to the table and decisions are made. You see it in cities and local governments where a small group of powerful people, or perceptively powerful people, make decisions for the good of everyone else without involving them in the decision. At the Denver Foundation, we had developed a really strong program on ways to expand involvement of people of color in nonprofits. And the basic theme is developing an inclusive environment where you make sure that you have a cross-section of the people that are going to be affected by this decision at the decision table. So if it's going to impact Native Americans, you definitely want to have Native Americans involved in creating the solution or overseeing the issue. The Denver Foundation organization itself was probably the most diverse and inclusive organization I've ever seen. If you want to take a cross-section of the Denver metropolitan area in terms of age, ethnicity, sexual preference, you would see that mirrored in the organization of the Denver Foundation. And we tried to do that with our board. You know, you can actually have, I think at one time the director checked and he found that, you know, a third of the members were Democrats, a third were Republicans, and a third were uncommitted. It's not a requirement, they just happened to, you know, check on that. So I noticed that when I was leading that organization, I might have my personal view of how I think a decision should be made. But as long as everyone participated in that decision, as long as everyone's voice was heard and a consensus reached, I thought the decision was probably better. May not have been exactly what I wanted, but I felt pretty good about it if everyone had participated in it. That's continued on in my efforts with Boulder Community Hospitals Board. The board is much more diverse now than it was. There's more women on board. There's slightly different, greater percentage of people of color. But the organization itself understands the importance of being direct and seeking out that diversity to the point where if we see that we need to have a female in a certain position, we go out and find a female. We were kind of short on females on the board, and there was a point there where we didn't look at males. We made a decision that we needed to increase that, and there's plenty of qualified females. The same goes for ethnicities. You know, we realized we were losing an African American We made a point of going out and looking for African Americans to fill a role. When I step down, I know there will be a concerted effort to make sure there's Hispanic to take my place, because that is important, and the organization becomes better. The organization, the board of today is, I think more talented than the board of several years ago, and it's getting better. So I think it's, for the organization, it's just a real plus. So I try to do that in everything I do, to make sure that the decisions, reflect everyone's point of view to the furthest extent possible. And it's part of, like, when you're researching a case, you want to, understand all aspects of the case, all sides of it. And if you understand the case from 360 degrees in all views, you'll probably make a good decision. You'll be able to explain it in a better way. So it's that type of thoroughness, I think, that's important to carry on in all aspects of work.
Very good. Well, Mr. Lopez, and I very respectfully address you as Mr. Lopez. It's been my sincere pleasure. I know I speak for Veronica to tell you that it's been an enjoyable experience. Without a doubt, I can visualize that in the future people will be looking at this this video and taking a lesson from it. So thank you for your time. Let me ask you before we leave, is there anything either that has been mentioned or that we've left out that you might want to comment on?
No,
How do you do that?
Yeah, I think this effort is important, and for the reasons you cited, and I've heard that this is a piece of history, Boulder, that's kind of ignored. We've seen in our history books how historians tend to ignore certain parts or certain things that have happened because either they're ashamed of it or it's difficult to write about. And this is a piece that, as you noted, it was missing. And I think it is important. And the contributions of Latinos in this county are significant. And I'm just one of many, I'm sure.
Very good. Thank you very much. And we'll leave it with that, all right? Thank you.
Thank you.